Okay, picture this. You step onto a remote island. You don't speak a single word of the local language, and you're surrounded by intense tribal warfare. Pretty terrifying, right? But then, imagine leaving that exact same island 20 years later, and behind you is a peaceful, thriving, literate community. Well, in this explainer, we're unpacking the absolutely wild true story of John Geddie. We're going to look at a pioneer whose nearly 25 years of service literally reshaped a South Pacific island, and we'll trace exactly how this remarkable transformation happened. Now, there's this famous memorial inscription written in Geddie's honor, and it makes a seriously staggering claim. It says, when he landed in 1848, there were no Christians. When he left in 1872, there were no heathen. I mean, it almost sounds like a myth, doesn't it? How does one person, starting from scratch with absolutely zero local knowledge, trigger a societal transformation of that magnitude? It's a massive historical shift, and we really need to break down the actual mechanics of how he pulled this off.
So to understand how he accomplished this, let's look at Section 1, Leaving Comfort for Danger.
Born in Scotland, raised in Canada, and ordained as a Presbyterian minister, honestly, Geddie seemed completely set for a standard, quiet pastoral life. But then, in 1848, he made a radical pivot. Inspired by the missionary movement of the time, he packed up his wife Charlotte and their young kids and sailed halfway across the world to the New Hebrides, what we know today as Vanuatu. Just think about the logistics of doing that in the 1840s. It was a massive geographical leap, and a journey that would define the rest of his life until he passed away in Geelong at age 57. And what's crazy is that he willingly traded absolute security for complete vulnerability. He walked away from a safe, comfortable ministry in Canada and stepped right into a world of tropical diseases, extreme isolation, massive language barriers, and communities dealing with persistent tribal warfare on the island of Aneityum. Very few people had ever even attempted to work there, and the challenges were just monumental. But despite those daily hardships, he refused to give up, which brings us to Section 2. Breaking the language barrier. You see, instead of just forcing his own language onto the islanders, he actually chose to learn theirs. He lived directly among the community and spent years systematically learning the Aneityumese language. And from there, he carefully developed a written form for their spoken words, translated portions of the Bible, and even produced Christian hymns. He basically built a bridge of communication entirely from the ground up. So the real secret here is that true influence requires speaking the audience's language, literally and culturally. Geddie didn't just stand on a soapbox shouting instructions, right? He earned their trust through genuine friendship and faithful service. He understood that foundational ideas only really take root when people can process them in their own native tongue. But translation was just step one. To ensure the mission survived, he had to pass the baton. Let's look at Section 3, Education and Indigenous Leadership. He wasn't just preaching. He was actively building a self-sustaining community infrastructure. He systematically established schools for children, structured Bible classes, specialized teacher training programs, and broad literacy programs. He pushed incredibly hard for this widespread education so that eventually, as more islanders learned to read, they could study and lead entirely on their own without needing him hovering over them. And this whole strategy really hinges on Indigenous leadership. Instead of hoarding power as an outsider, which, let's be honest, happened a lot back then, Geddie focused heavily on training the locals to gradually take on more and more responsibility for the ministry. By intentionally empowering the islanders and handing over the reins, he ensured the church would experience sustainable growth, completely independent of him. After over 20 years of patient work, this methodology truly paid off. Here is Section 4, the transformation of Aneityum. The societal shift over those 24 years was just profound. Back in 1848, the island faced persistent violence, had no written language, and zero Christian presence. But fast forward to 1872, and the environment had completely flipped. While these kinds of shifts are always influenced by multiple factors, Geddie's ministry was undeniably central. The violence had largely yielded to peaceful communities. Literacy was rapidly expanding, and a thriving local church was entirely led by Indigenous leaders. Now, actually, I should clarify something about that famous "no heathen" quote we discussed earlier. Historians view this as more of a commemorative summary, not a literal, strict mathematical census of every single individual on the island. But even without absolute statistics, the overarching sociological and cultural shift he catalyzed is absolutely undeniable. The entire foundation of the society had been reorganized. Because of this massive success, he earned the title the Father of Presbyterian Missions in the South Seas. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Lessons in Long-Term Service. Stepping out of the 19th century for a second, we have to ask, what can modern leaders learn from Geddie's methodology? I mean, why does this matter today? And how do these historical methods actually translate to modern community building and organizational leadership? Well, Geddie's life offers a pretty amazing blueprint. First, lasting work requires immense patience and perseverance. Second, speaking the local language, whether that's a literal language or just understanding a specific corporate or regional culture, is absolutely non-negotiable for real connection. Third, education empowers people. And finally, true sustainability only happens when you pass the leadership over to the locals. Ultimately, John Geddie's story leaves us with an incredibly powerful model. It shows us that a lifetime of faithful service, rooted in cultural respect and long-term commitment, really can transform an entire community. It's a remarkable example of patient guidance, creating a ripple effect across an entire region. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. If you were dropped into an entirely new culture tomorrow, facing immense challenges, would you have the patience to truly listen, to observe, and to learn their language before ever trying to lead them? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it sparks some curiosity about how we connect with, respect, and build up the communities around us.